No one writes warrior poets better than my favorite author, Steven Pressfield. I first found him with his Gates of Fire about the Battle of Thermopylae. That's King Leonidas. You saw a movie 300 that's based on those historical events. Incredible, mind-blowing book. Loved it. Then Tides of War, Virtues of War, and he just wrote another book called Man at Arms, and it blew my mind. And so really you got to check out his works. But I want you guys to lean in and watch me interview Pressfield, who's about to be on in just a moment, so that we can all just learn from this man's genius, and you can see kind of why this dude's a hero of mine. Hey, Steven, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, John. It's great to be here.
I very rarely get starstruck. I know all like the most dangerous gunfighter guys in the world and different celebrities I meet, but truly meeting you, pretty starstruck. Thank you.
Well, please, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to dive in to the genre that you primarily write. That's historical fiction. It's my favorite genre to read, but a lot of folks don't really know how to react to that. They're not really sure what that is because you're taking such creative liberties in developing characters, personalities, dialogue that didn't exist. Would you make a case for historical fiction?
Now, I share those same misgivings. You wonder when you're reading historical fiction, this contemporary writer is making stuff up. How does she know? How does he know? All that kind of thing. But the alternative, which is like straight academic, history, is held to such stringent rules that it's really hard to get into to humanize the characters, or even to I think when I'm writing historical fiction, I feel like I'm sort of beaming myself in my imagination back into that world. And I'm kind of asking myself, what would really happen, right? How would this really be? What would the Spartans really be like? What would the Romans really be like? And of course, you can't really tell from Thucydides or Herodotus or Caesar or anything like that because they're so formal. I do that, and I think that brings a closer reality. Obviously, you have to take it with a grain of salt. Maybe this writer doesn't know what they're talking about. Maybe they don't have a sense of it. But if they do, when you're reading, somebody like Robert Graves or someone like that, you really feel like you're back there, Right. And it's the closest thing to having a video camera right there in that era. So you have to give it a little slack, historical fiction, a little slack, cut them a little slack because of the nature of the imaginary venture that it is. But if it's a really good writer, I think nothing takes you back there like that. And movies are the same way. When you see Gladiator or you see Game of Thrones or something like that, that's obviously written by contemporary people. It's not the real thing, but when it's done great, you really feel like you're right back there.
Right. I love how you use the real history to really craft personalities. Like in Virtues of War, it was about Alexander the Great. You're there and you're following him around. And I mean, he's just fatally flawed and he's got some attractive pieces. And then you're in the trenches, digging fighting positions. And you're saying stuff that it made me feel like you were either there. Like you were a warrior in the trenches. You're saying stuff of like people think it's the shield and the sword that's the tools of war, but really it's the pickaxe and the shovel. And I'm kind of like, man, what kind of scholar? It's either like the greatest scholar or a time traveler or a warrior. Have you just read everything?
I've read a lot, but I think a lot of it really, John, is imagination. A lot of it is really beaming yourself back and bringing what you know from contemporary life, I was an infantryman in the Marine Corps Reserve. I know what, an entrenching tool is, and I know that that's the nature of the beast. But also, when you read in the ancient world, when a city was besieged, what the besieging army did was they built this wall of circumvallation around, another wall around the city. And if you just imagine what that was like, that was like a years-long proposition where the besieging army is basically just engineers, just, manual labor, digging, bringing the rocks in, getting the mortar, climbing the wall, all that sort of stuff. That's really, what it was all about. So a lot of it is is imagination, entering into the events in your imagination, asking yourself, what would it really be like if I were really here? What would I really be seeing?
All right, so speaking of imagination and story writing, how much of the whole do you start with? Because a lot of your books, particularly Man at Arms, it kind of cascades. That's your newest book. It cascades into this culminating sequence, and from chapter to chapter, you're jumping into different narratives and back and forth, and it all kind of brings together for a climactic finish. Do you start with the end and then you work toward it, or do you just kind of find your way as you go?
That's a great question, John. I spent about 10 years as a screenwriter. And one of the kind of the principles of screenwriting is to start at the end, to know what the climax is and then build to it. So I'm definitely a believer in that. And doesn't necessarily mean that I know exactly what's going to happen in the climax, but I know who's going to be there. I know more or less what they're going to say or do. And then I do work backwards from that. But also, you start at odd places too. Like, I don't know, do you want me to get into this a little bit?
Yeah, do whatever you want, man. I'm here to hang out.
Like with The Virtues of War, which is about the one you just mentioned, which was about Alexander the Great. The way that book started for me was two sentences popped into my mind, and I knew that they were the first two sentences of a book. And I don't know where they came from. The sentences were, "I have always been a soldier. I have known no other life." And I thought, that's the start of a book. But I didn't know who was saying those sentences. And I kind of sat with that for like 3 months. And asking myself, is it this character Telamon that's in A Man of Arms? Is it somebody? And finally it sort of hit me, this is Alexander the Great. And so that's how that story started, without any ending, any middle, anything, but just a sort of a point of view of telling Alexander's story as a soldier, not as a conqueror, not as a crazy person, not as a whatever, the other slants that people have taken on him. So books start in crazy ways, movies do too.
One of my favorite characters you've ever written was Deinonychus from Gates of Fire. Guys, if you don't know what this was about, if you've seen the movie 300, based on the War of Thermopylae, incredible. This is Leonidas, but one of the key characters in Gates of Fire is a guy named Deinonychus. And what I just noticed, it was my very first book I'd ever read of yours, Gates of Fire, and I immediately just saw it, like, no one writes warrior poets like you do. Just amazing. Just all the elements are there. They're living for higher purpose. They're philosophers. They're extremely dangerous. They're ready to sacrifice in the defense of others. And so that warrior poet kind of theme, and there's this gritty masculinity that's there as well. And frankly, I think in our modern world today, I don't think the first world has room for that gritty masculinity. They don't have room for dangerous men anymore. And you revive them in the past and bring them into the present. How do you write warrior poets so well? And what is your message to men today that probably know we've lost something?
It's really interesting, John. I just actually had breakfast with a friend of mine, a Marine officer named Ed Hinman, who's now like 45. He's been out. We talked about this exact same subject. He's kind of passionate about this same thing, that masculinity has kind of, is really under attack and challenge, and there is no sort of, I think since the thermonuclear bomb was invented, the concept of war going to any sort of inhabiting any kind of noble dimension has kind of gone totally down the tubes. So the only sort of place that it sort of exists in my mind is in the past or in imagination, one way or another. Let me just correct one thing, as I don't want to take credit for something that isn't mine. The movie 300 didn't come from Gates of Fire. It came from a graphic novel by that same title. So Gates of Fire has never been made as a movie or anything like that. But the character of Deinonychus, of course, was a true character. If you read Herodotus, and when he's talking about the Battle of Thermopylae, he quotes Deinonychus, and he was a real Spartan who really fought there and was really considered by those who fought there to be the bravest of all of the men that fought there.
It's funny, I'll read a name or a word, but no one talks about even Thermopylae, or nobody's talking about this stuff. When I was reading the Bible, I read it a book of the Bible as Philemon, but I found out the pronunciation was Philemon, but no one was there. I just read it. So it's not Deinonychus, it's Deinonychus.
Or I say it Deinonychus, but if we had a real Greek here, they would have a whole real different pronunciation of that. So well, I don't know.
I'm willing to wager you're right. You're right, and I'm wrong.
I don't know. It's up for grabs.
So outside of your books, I follow you on Instagram, and you're talking about the Warrior Archetype a lot. Would you tell me what the Warrior Archetype is for our viewers?
I did a little series on Instagram. My girlfriend and I, she's behind the camera, I'm in front of the camera. And it was like maybe 5, 6, 7-minute pieces. We did 50 of them that we put out 2 a week. And the subject was the Warrior Archetype. And I don't know how deep into the weeds you want to get with this, John, but the concept of the archetypes is a Jungian psychological concept that in our psyche from birth, there exists a sort of a deck of cards of super personalities called the archetypes. And they might be like the youngest one is the divine child, and you have the youth, the lover, the wanderer, the trickster, the warrior, the queen, the crone, the king, the sage, the mystic, sort of. And these are kind of personalities that we kind of, as we mature, we sort of evolve from one of these archetypes to another. But the one that seems to hang in the most for men is the warrior archetype. And the warrior archetype usually kicks in around maybe when we're 13 or 14 years old, and lasts through maybe when we're 28, 29. And it makes us want to try out for the football team, makes us want to drive fast, makes us want to jump off the top of buildings, blow things up, hang out with our buddies, that kind of thing. And of course, the military, feeds on that warrior archetype, and why young men in particular, and women too, why they get off on military training and stuff so much is this archetype is deep in their psyche, just begging to be lived out. So I sort of did this series just sort of to examine what the warrior archetype was, and what are the strengths of it, and what are the weaknesses of it, and how we evolve through it and beyond it. So that was what the series was about.
My oldest son is 8, and his warrior archetype, he didn't need to wait till 13. At 8, it is in full swing. He desperately wants to be a writer. We let him know, hey, there's a lot of study, there's a lot of reading, there's a lot of learning, and he's writing all the time. But I noticed you in your journey, you didn't just all of a sudden become a fantastic writer. I believe it was around 28 years before you had a really big hit. And in the meantime, to pay the bills, you're like just eking along and working odd jobs and driving tractor trailers and stuff before you really hit it big. What can you tell us in regards to talent and just raw perseverance?
That's a great question, John. I'm not a real believer in talent. I think obviously if you're Michael Jordan, you have to have the genes to be Michael Jordan, right?
Sure.
But certainly for me, like right now, people tell me I'm a talent, but for 35 years they told me I was a bum, and I was a bum. And there is, in terms of being able to do what I was trying to do, to me it is 99% work, and you really can get better, trying and failing over and over again. You do get better after a while. So I come out way on the hard work side of that.
Got it. I want to talk about Man-at-Arms, but before I get there, I want some just simple kind of fun questions, because I kind of want to end with Man-at-Arms so I can tell everyone, hey, go buy his new book. It's amazing. I'm actually thrilled about it. I finished it maybe a month or 2 ago, and I'm just as excited now as I was then, perhaps even more so. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. What is your favorite book not written by you?
That's a great question. I could name a few. Probably my favorite ever would be Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War. and practically nobody's read it because it's unbelievably difficult to read. You know, it's thick, it's long, it's really dense, but it's so great. But coming down to the real world, I would name two American novels. One would be The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway,
Yep.
and the other would be The Moviegoer by Walker Percy, which is a less well-known book, won the National Book Award for Fiction, I think in 1962, and just a book I've read over and over, and I love it. I'm reading it right now.
Hemingway doesn't surprise me because I immediately classified you similarly with him. He's got that kind of gritty masculinity that you just don't see a lot. You don't see a lot of manly writers out there. So fantastic. Really like that. And folks, if you're listening in and you heard Steven Pressfield talk about the Peloponnesian War, I've got a better recommendation. You can read The Tides of War, which is his book on the Peloponnesian War. Really loved it. And I didn't know anything about Alcibiades or any of these other characters, but fell in love with them. Great. And there's me plugging your book after asking you a question. Right. How do you want people to remember you?
That's a great question. I don't think I even worry about that at all. I don't think it's on my radar. I'm just trying to do the work that I feel like I was put on this planet to do. And if I can do that, and keep going as long as I can, that'll be good enough for me.
Very good. Man at Arms, can you give us a synopsis of your most recent book?
A Man at Arms is set in the ancient world. It's set about 20 years after the crucifixion in Judea, where the Roman Empire was dominant at that time. And it's sort of about the aftermath of the crucifixion. It has its hero, Telamon of Arcadia. I think of him like a Clint Eastwood type of gunslinger of the ancient world, the one-man killing machine of the ancient world, who's, with a sword and with every other weapon, he can handle himself. And the story is really, see if you agree with this, John, having, read it and having it soak in a little bit. It's a Western. It's really a story of kind of a solitary man at arms, a warrior, like a samurai, who gets an assignment that turns out to be kind of a dirty assignment, a bad assignment, working for the bad guys. And it turns into a chase across the desert, across the Sinai desert. And there's a young girl in the story, a young feral mute girl who holds sort of the key to the mystery of the story. And the relationship between this warrior, this one-man killing machine, and this young girl is the heart of the story. And she humanizes him, is sort of the short version of it. It's a passage in my mind from fear to love. And it gets a little spiritual at the end.
I wouldn't compare him to Clint Eastwood. He seemed a little too nasty to be Clint Eastwood will just shoot you, but Telamon will break a bottle and eviscerate you. Telamon is a bad news animal. The book does get spiritual at the end, and Telamon is basically commissioned to stop the spread of the Bible, which is as a Christian, that's a really antithetical way to look at a story that I spend a great amount of my life looking at. So it's really kind of a fun perspective shift of he's stopping these dangerous radicals and revolutionaries, these first century Christians. And it does culminate in the spiritual and even the miraculous. You allow the miracle to be a real miracle. Where do you stand kind of spiritually? Because I didn't know before, but at the end of the book, I'm kind of like, where does he stand?
Well, I'm definitely, I'm not in any particular tradition, but I definitely am a believer in other dimensions, higher dimensions of reality, and higher dimensions of nobility, and higher dimensions of love. And so this story, when you're a writer, a novelist, a screenwriter, or something like that, you're always looking for something you can hang a story on, kind of a what if premise, and it doesn't necessarily matter sometimes if you have any kind of message or anything like that, but the message can I go back a little bit and tell a little bit more about
You can do whatever you want, man. We're in charge here. We're just making it up.
All right. A couple of years ago, my niece got married, and she asked me to be the officiant of the wedding. So I immediately got out the Book of Common Prayer, and I was looking for, quotations or whatever I could use into what I said. And I came up with like 3 or 4 right away, love beareth all things, believeth all things, endureth all things. The question of the quote about faith, hope, and charity, and of the greatest of these is charity. And I realized that all of these quotes came from one source. They came from the book in the Bible called 1 Corinthians, which was the letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to the real letter to the fledgling Christian community at Corinth in Greece. Right. So, and that letter is all about love. He's encouraging the Christian community that's under a lot of pressure and is doing infighting and stuff like that to follow the teachings of their Savior, to love one another, et cetera, to trust in that, to have faith. And so as a sort of a storyteller, I thought, what if this letter were real and it was really going out to these communities? Rome would want to stop it. This would be a real threat to Rome because it's the rise of a new faith, right? Which in fact did overthrow Rome. So that was sort of the genesis of the story. I thought, what if we have this letter that Rome wants to stop, and I can throw my bad guy, my one-man killing machine Telamon in there. So I've even actually, John, I even forgot what the question was, but that's sort of how this thing evolved. It was about faith. It was about where I stand on that. So I'm definitely a believer in everything that's in that letter in 1 Corinthians. And that's what made it so important to me and made it, the payoff of the story.
So people don't read anymore, in my opinion. Some people will buy books, but really we just kind of Netflix out, or, we're just entertaining ourselves to death. I'm of the opinion, especially young people, they just don't read anymore. At best, they buy books, but they just don't read. Preach to us. Tell us what the cost is of a generation that no longer reads, and what are we missing? What would it do to us if the world picked up books again?
I think that there are a lot of people that are sort of stealth readers that you don't really realize. I mean, talking to my friends and people that I know, they're readers, people you wouldn't think. People from the gym that you think the only thing they do is, squat, X hundred pounds, and you find out that they are readers. But you're right. I think even I don't read as much as I ought to. And I don't think we know what's going to happen, John, what's going to come in the future out of this. It can't be good. Although I will say certain Netflix things that are good and movies that are good are quite literary, but still, it's a sad thing. I mean, one of my heroes is General Jim Mattis, who was the Secretary of Defense and was a 4-star Marine general. And he says, if you don't read, you can't consider yourself a citizen. You can't consider yourself, worthy of voting even. He has a massive library and believes in that. And even to his young officers, he says, how are you going to learn except from your own mistakes if you don't read, where you can learn from other people's mistakes? So it's definitely, I commend you guys, the Warrior Poet Society, for trying to make people, open a book and actually read words.
Yeah, we're on journeys, and that's really where all this came from. Warrior Poet Society. I was just on this personal journey and wanted to live it out, see if anyone else wanted to go with me on it. And so that's really what our society is all about. We're living for our purpose, ready to sacrifice in the defense of others. We'd like to be dangerous men and women. So, but you played a part in my journey as well over the years. I've just been reading your different books and growing. I don't know if Man at Arms is my favorite. I think so. Just because you said it in first century Christianity and you said a pit bull after the Bible, it's just kind of like, man, that's pretty nuts. It's pretty nuts. And the culmination, I so desperately want to give away your book and tell everyone that happens, but I'm not going to do it. Guys, you'll have to pick up a copy I'll have links to Steven Pressfield so that you can follow him and learn more from him, but also his books and the favorite books that I've read by him. I'm going to put them below this video in the description. Guys, make sure you go ahead and give this video a thumbs up because we earned it. We worked hard. Share the video, comment down below, subscribe, train hard, train smart, and yeah, stay free. Steven, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, thanks a lot, John, and thanks for the great. It really was a pleasure. And anytime, if you want me back again for anything else, I'm happy to do it, even when I'm not promoting anything.
Really, I'd like to get you out on the range and let's shoot some, man. I'm gonna come visit you, bring you some t-shirts.
I'm game for that.
Sounds good. Well, Semper Fi. All right, guys, take it easy.